Hello, planet Earth, and welcome to episode 55 of the Parenting Autism Podcast. We are your hosts here today, my lovely wife, Sandy, and I'm Chris. How are you, Sandy?
I'm doing good.
All right.
You always sound so formal when you give your introductions.
I'm trying my best radio voice.
Oh, okay. Well, that was a good one.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. Oh, well, you know what? It's good to have some laughter after the week that we've had because it was a bit of an emotional roller coaster.
It has been.
It has been.
It ended on a high note.
And it has, which is good because
we were at the low note.
When I was upset, I thought, oh, should we do a podcast? And I thought, no, I think that might be too raw. You even said, why don't you wait
24 hours at least.
Yeah, which is my rule, to see if something's still bothering me 24 hours before I, need to respond. And it was still bothering me, but I'm working through it. And I really feel like this podcast that we're going to do today hopefully will help other people. We try to keep it very positive and uplifting on here. And, we want to give encouragement. We want to give hope. And if we wallowed in our woes, I wouldn't want to tune into it all the time.
We'd be hopeless.
We would be hopeless. And I also think it's important that you also keep it real because people could listen to our podcast and if all they hear is, rainbows, unicorns, and sunshine, then they might think that, well, that's not my world and they can't even relate to me.
Our faithful listeners know it's not all rainbows and unicorns.
Right. Yeah. So we were talking a couple of episodes ago about how we're in a sweet spot, a really sweet season right now. And it has been really, really good. And I'm not saying it's not good today, but I do feel like we've gone outside of our bubble a couple of times lately. And so that just seems to bring, I don't know, it just seems to make everything a little more
difficult,
highlighted. Magnified would probably be the word I'm looking for. I think it just magnifies Bryce's autism when we're in different settings.
Yep.
Things that aren't our safe space or people that aren't familiar with him. So that's what we have been experiencing lately. And we also had an experience that occurred with his therapist who do know him, but have never seen him have a meltdown like they had earlier this week. So we've just had some new developments, and I really wanted to talk about and be vulnerable and transparent that you and I have both felt like we have failed Bryce in some ways this week.
Yeah.
And you said it out loud before I had my incident, and then I was thinking it, and then I was getting all emotional because it's like, it's the worst feeling to feel like you failed him in some way because we're trying so hard to help him and advocate for him. And I think we're hard on ourselves sometimes. So I have to be there and tell you, it's okay. I mean, it's going to happen, but, and then I need you there to tell me it's okay, but I also don't want to diminish our feelings because if we feel it, then we feel it, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. So to kind of paint the picture, for the listeners, I felt like the beginning of the week was where all of this really began. And we went to a graduation party for our niece. And so there was some family members there of hers that do not see Bryce very often. And everybody's friendly and everybody's polite. And but you get those looks of their pity looks. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like I know, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? And,
okay. I didn't feel that way.
Well, it was coming to
me.
And
again, I'm not as observant.
Well, and that's not it either. You're a man and I'm a woman. We're wired differently, which is one reason why we do this podcast together, because I don't know. Maybe I'm hormonal right now, but I have been very emotionally unstable this week.
Women feel vibes and men don't really.
Yeah, and I don't mean this in an unkind way at all.
Right.
It's just sometimes you can, I've heard other people say that, like, if you're going...
Women's intuition.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, like, if you're going through a divorce or something and some people be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And you're like, no, it really is okay. Or you kind of get that pity look. But they were being very polite, and they were being polite to Bryce. But I could tell. I mean, it's the way he does these conversations, and I'm using air quotes there. He just jumps into the middle of something, and people have no clue what he's talking about.
Yeah. And
this particular time, he had just played a game where apparently he was driving his car on the ceiling. So he's going in and saying, oh, I drive my car on the ceiling, And so everybody's being polite. They're nodding their heads. But as his mom, I want to explain everything, but I feel like I didn't need to because they were all cool about it. But
plus, it's not the environment to do it. I mean,
an explanation wasn't necessary, but I will say that it magnified the fact that Bryce has autism, and so then I can't help that it still hurts my heart a little bit when I have those reminders brought up to me.
Me too. I mean, listen.
Intentionally or unintentionally.
If he's trying to tell somebody something and it was something happened earlier in the day and they have no clue what it's about, I feel the same way. I'm like, he's talking about fill in the blank.
Yeah, we just say that was a game he was playing. And
because
it was good.
He does. He just goes up to somebody, and thank God he goes up to somebody and he starts a conversation. Yes. I mean, that is a blessing.
It really is. And so we know, and we've talked about it in the past, that one of our challenges that we'll have for him is to teach him how to prelude a conversation to say, on my game, I was driving a car on the ceiling.
Right.
So people can kind of clue in, and that's something we're going to work on. But I suppose, to me, when I was making notes for this podcast, that's kind of like how my week began, was being out of my safe zone, being around people that aren't around him all the time, people that are still know our situation, very kind about it. But it was still magnified. Yeah. So that's day one. Then we rolled to day two. And day two was actually a high note because we had Cub Scouts that evening. And it was different because it was the Christmas party one. And so everybody was outside and it was all ages. It wasn't just kindergartners.
Christmas games.
Yeah. And when he's with just his lion group, they're kind of oblivious to the fact that he has autism or that there's anything even different about him other than he's tall. And I don't even know if they recognize that he's tall. That's why it's a good age group to start him with. And his leader is fantastic and she's actually naturally very protective of him and helps him great. So I love that she is his leader. But he's with all the ages. And so he got called up front everybody because he had won an award, and for all those who sponsored him for his popcorn fundraiser, thank you, because he had the highest amount out of the entire troop pack. I don't know how all that works, but anyway, he was the highest, so they recognized him. But he had to go up there by himself, him and one other little boy. And then he kind of didn't know what to do, and he was spinning in circles. And so again, my mommy heart was like, oh boy, you want to kind of take a hook and bring him back to you? You know what I mean? Like, okay, you're done.
Or have like a ear piece in him.
Stop spinning.
Bryce, stop spinning.
But we couldn't because we were way in the back because we wanted to stay away from everybody because of COVID. Right. So it was like, oh, okay. So again, his den leader stepped in and she kind of hooked him for us and brought him back to us. And then you had to leave to go to your men's Bible study. So I was there with him to kind of finish up that meeting. And would you not know, they called him up again. So, he had twice that he went up there, once to get a patch, once for that. But it was all okay, and I got past that part. But the sweet part was they surprised us and they had a Santa and Mrs. Claus there, which we were not expecting. And Bryce is all into Santa this year. We participated in a ornament gift exchange. And so Santa was there and he was ready to go to Santa. And I said, hey, buddy, you get to get an ornament, so you get to choose one off the table. And the ornaments were wrapped up. So he grabbed an ornament off the table. And right away he said to me, I want to give this to Santa. And I said, you want to give it to Santa? He goes, yes, that would be nice. And I said, yeah, that would be nice. And I've been really working on him this Christmas season about giving. So proud mommy moment. And I was like, yay. So we stood in line for quite a while because let me tell you, this was a chatty Santa. He was fantastic, but he was chatty with all of the kids and
That's
they all
great.
had a lot to say. So and Bryce very patiently waited for him. It was wonderful. So when it was finally his turn, he got up there and he handed it to Santa, and the Santa was like, that's a present for me. And I mean, he like bought into the whole thing. In fact, I shared the video on our Parenting Autism Facebook page because it's so sweet. And that's really Bryce's heart. And that this man, not knowing anything about Bryce.
Santa
the man, he was like so wonderful with Bryce. And, it was just really a great moment. And so I left that evening feeling on a high, like, wow, that was so good, you know? So now we go to the next.
Wait a minute. You left did I
leave a big thing out?
Let me just talk about this.
Chime in.
Let me chime in here.
Please do.
Did you tell him what the ornament was?
Oh, I did not.
So the
take
ornament was an airplane. Oh my goodness. It's one of Bryce's favorite things. So... And he was still okay giving it to Santa, even though it was his. You know, he gave it to Santa and didn't want it back, even after Santa got it.
Yeah, because
right?
Bryce didn't know what it was because he left it wrapped. And then when Santa did unwrap it and I saw that it was an airplane, I did have a moment where, Bryce is going to want this back.
Right. But he didn't.
No, he did not.
And so Santa said he's going to put it in the cockpit of his sleigh.
Yes, you're right. That's such a great part of the story.
Bryce was over the moon about that.
Because when you got home, he said to you right away, Santa's going to put my airplane in the cockpit of the sleigh, and you didn't know what he was talking about.
I didn't. But you showed me the video.
I did, and he was so excited.
Yes,
so,
I would just wanted to add that in there because that was huge.
You're right. Yeah. That was such a big part of it.
He was such a great. Santa was so great.
Yes.
And he was so engaged with the kids, you know, and he was just having a great night, Santa was.
Yeah, and Bryce was very curious where the sleigh was.
Yes.
And so he asked me while we were in line, where's this sleigh? I said, oh, no, you can ask him. So he did ask him, where's your sleigh? And then Santa explained that the reindeers are kind of finicky, and so they hide the sleigh, and then he has to call for him to bring it back when he's ready to go.
Yes,
so it was like a game. So, and then he says, is that okay with you? And Bryce stood there and thought, and he goes, yes. Okay, so it's good. So that whole moment was
so awesome.
So special for us. And so again, you kind of leave okay, this is all right. And he did really well tonight, all things considered. He had to go up twice in front of all these people, and then he did that with Santa.
He doesn't seem bothered about being in front of people doing something.
No.
He has
I'm the one that's aware that he's doing it. Yeah, he has no problem with it.
But as kids, I would have been terrified to go up in front of everybody to do that. But he is just oblivious that, maybe he's not oblivious.
I think he doesn't care about what people think.
He doesn't. And I love that.
And we do. So that's the difference. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he just accepts everybody, and he accepts who he is, and he doesn't care. He doesn't even know there's any difference. So he's totally cool with it. So, so the next day I'm coming home from work, and I got a text from you saying that Bryce was really upset at therapy and that you were going to be getting the scoop. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I got home, you were starting to get the details, but we didn't know what was happening.
Right.
And so it happened in his first hour with his occupational therapist. Mm-hmm. So then, thankfully, his speech and language therapist, she recorded him discreetly.
Yeah.
And it was so big for us because this is what you and I do, which is a great tip for parents. You will record Bryce if something's going on that he's upset about and vice versa, because we may pick something up out of it, that we can go back and try to figure out. Because, it's always what happened before, what happened during, what happened after. So I'm like, well, I don't know. We need to know what happened before, because the explanation was that he said he was upset that he didn't get to spend more time on the swing. Right. And that he dropped to the floor, and that he was trying to lick himself and spit on himself and climb up a table and really wild behavior and pouring tears, streaming.
So I get that in a text, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh no, she just said, I don't know what's going on with Bryce. I think she said he fell to the floor. I've never seen behavior like this. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And he's still there,
right.
you know? So I'm like, do I need to go pick him up? What's going on? So I texted her back and I said, hey, what's going on? And she must have been with another client or something, because it took her a little bit to get back to me. But when she did, she explained everything that was going on.
Yeah. And I think, you know, to give a little more detail on that.
I think I actually talked to her on the phone, which was better. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the reason why he was licking himself and trying to spit on himself is because we've really convinced him to not hurt himself by poking his eye and banging his ears and his head. Mm-hmm. So I think he was trying to find a way that he thought he could hurt himself, but without hurting himself.
What we figured out
and throwing
is
himself to the floor.
When he's overwhelmed with a sense of sadness or
an emotion.
Mm-hmm. When he's just overwhelmed, it has to come out of him. And those were the ways that it came out that time.
That's exactly it.
He can't take a deep breath in the moment and then tell us what happened. Mm-hmm. He acts out, and you know, that's what we've learned. If it's too much for him, he just comes apart.
Yeah. And so he's coming apart and we're having no idea why. So then the video comes in, which we're very thankful for. So we're watching the video and she asked him something, and then somehow she mentioned the word toys. And he says, I want the toys. I want the toys. And then she's like, you want what toys? What toys are you wanting? And like a light bulb went on over your head and you said, oh. And I'm like, what? And you said that earlier in the day. Well, I'll let you say it. What happened?
Well, yeah, he was...
Because I wasn't here.
Yeah, he was stuck on a potty, and he plays his iPad sometimes while he's on the potty. And we needed to get back to school, and he was in there a long time, and I gave him several cues to say, okay, let's move it along. And he wasn't listening. So I said, okay, I'm going to tell Elf that, you know, you're not listening. So I was like, Elf. I said, Bryce isn't listening. And that, to my surprise, didn't get him off of the toilet. So I said, okay. I said, you know the deal. I said, I'm going to go talk to Santa. I think we're going to cross one of the things off your list because you're not listening. And so...
And how did he react to that?
Well, then he said, okay, let's cross one off, Daddy. You know how he gets.
Right.
You know, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do it.
Yeah, Bryce will tell you to do something that he really doesn't want you to do if it's something that he doesn't want. It's like mind games.
Opposites, yeah. So anyway, I go to do it, and he's like, no, Daddy, no. I don't cross anything off. And he got off the potty, and I said, okay. I said, I didn't cross anything off because I could tell he was getting antsy or whatever. And then he got off the potty, and we got back to school, and he never said another word about it. Never said another word about it.
So apparently he stewed on that. Mm-hmm. And then it came out when he was at therapy.
Yeah.
Because Bryce processes information, and it takes a long time for him to process information.
Oh, yeah.
So that probably was just going around and around and around in his mind. And then when he really thought about it and thought that he was going to lose one of his toys, because when he was saying it to Miss Andrea and she's going, what toys? And he goes, I need to have the camera to take pictures of my family, because that's one of his requests. And I need my remote control dog. So I knew then he's talking about his Christmas list. And then you knew it too.
Yeah.
You know, and then we're standing there and we're watching it, and it was a moment of silence here because, you know, you're in a position that you even said out loud, gosh, I feel like I'm such a failure, you know?
Because in the moment, I couldn't think of what else I could do to get him off the potty. And I was thinking more of along the lines of, okay, he's going to get something taken away because he's not obeying.
I know.
And then when you know.
Well, and then, you know, I'm in the tough spot of, okay, how do you say something? Like we can have a conversation going back and forth, and nobody needs to raise a voice and nobody needs to have tone, but it's still like you don't want to be accusing, like, but I did say, oh dear, oh my, I don't know what I said, but it was like, ugh, Bryce, I mean, he does not respond well to negativity like that. And he doesn't. He's never done well with spanking. He's never done well with anything that is a takeaway or punishment. He responds extremely well to the reward system. And then you're like, fine. So then tell me what would you do? What would you do? I said, I can't tell you what I would have done. I wasn't here. I don't know what led up to it, and we are his ABA techs now, so we have to be able to have conversations without being defensive. But I also don't want to come across as like somebody that doesn't know Bryce and says, oh, well, you should have done A, B, and C.
I think I was upset because I'm sitting here thinking, man, I could have done that differently. And you basically were telling me you should have done that differently.
I know.
And I'm like, I totally tanked that, and I was a little mad, and I'm like, well, what would you have done?
I know.
I'm not going to go out and get him donuts because he's not listening to me.
And I said I don't want to reward him like that.
Yeah.
But what we did agree upon, once we could talk it out, and I kept saying, listen, it could happen to either of us. So I was really trying to console you, but we did need to talk it out because
we had to figure it out.
And you said to me, it's so hard. You don't know. It's so hard, and I feel bad because I do have to leave here to go to work and leave you with him a lot longer during the day.
Again,
so then it's like and again, we're just being vulnerable and saying these are conversations that happen. You're in the moment. It's really not that hard, but then it makes me start thinking like, okay, so should we revisit our situation? Is this too much for you? All of that. So, that's what we've been kind of dealing with. And we did agree that what Bryce seems to respond to is if you can get him in agreement to a timer. But you can't set the timer. He needs to be in agreement. So you give him the choice. And once he buys in, then he has to follow through. And I have found that seems to work best with him. And so that's what we talked about and said, okay, just try that. And believe me, I've been in those moments too where you're so frustrated and you just want to move on that you do or say something. But all parents, special needs or not, shouldn't threaten things that they're not going to follow through on. I mean, at Cub Scouts, we hear this one little girl get threatened all the time. Really stop it. Do this, do that, and it's like over and over and over and over because she's like 2 and she just keeps doing it because she knows her dad's really not going to follow through, It's
She's
a natural thing,
They know what they can get away with.
They do, and they test those boundaries.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we got through that, but it was still in my mind what you said. So now we roll to the next day. And so this was Thursday, and we had an evening meeting with Scouts because we're now part of the committee.
Meeting. Yep.
So the prior month, there was really no issues, but just keeping in mind that when Bryce goes to this house with the parents that are on the committee, a lot of the kids are there, and they're not the kindergartners. They are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So it's a different group of kids that don't really know him or his situation. But when we went to the first meeting, his den leader, she said, I'll keep an eye on Bryce so you guys can be in the meeting and see what it's all about. Because they were kind of recruiting us.
Yeah.
So the first month, everything went well, but she wasn't able to come this time because she had a COVID situation. So it was not a big deal. I mean, we got there and I was okay with that. And then it was a different house, so we weren't familiar with the lay of the land. So when all the kids arrived and they wanted to go outside, it was already dark out. I didn't know what was outside. So I excused myself from the meeting to go out with the boys.
Yeah.
And there was, I think, 5 of them plus Bryce. And so
it's dark outside. And like you said, is the yard fenced in, is safety,
Yeah, I didn't know what was out there. So when I do go out there, I see that they have a large clubhouse that's 2-story. So you get up there by climbing a ladder, or they had a rope option, and then they had a slide that could come down so you could run up the slide. So Bryce was very excited when he saw that. And of course, all the other boys went bing right up the thing. So then Bryce wanted to try it. And at first he was very afraid, but I went over and I helped him. And then the oldest boy that was there, he was 10. He did come over and say, hey, I'll help you, which I appreciated. And he brought him up there. Well, when Bryce got up there, he was so excited. I mean, this was like a big deal for him. And he was jumping up and down and he was flapping his hands, and you know how he gets excited. He just, this is so great. This is so great. You know, and he's just like beaming with happiness and joy and flapping. And then I see him getting looks from the other boys, and one rolled his eyes and was pointing and like, you know, mocking him and laughing and imitating him, you know, and it hurt my heart. And I'm like, oh, gosh. Okay, yeah, we're out in the real world. And we are. And I can't fault the boys. I mean, if they don't know, they're boys. You know, boys. It can happen. I get it. And it's because they maybe haven't been educated, or maybe that's just their personalities and they are educated. I don't know that, but I figured they didn't know about Bryce.
And they did that in front of you.
Well, they didn't know that I could really see because they were inside the clubhouse, but I could still see everything because Bryce was not going to get out of my sight.
Okay.
So I know it was trying to be discreet.
Right.
But I could see it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So then when they came out and I could see them, then I said, are you guys familiar with autism? No. And I said, okay, well, Bryce has autism. And so that's why when he gets excited, he doesn't know how to regulate his emotions. So he gets excited and he flaps his hands and jumps up and down. And then the one boy like mocked him and said, like this? And I said, yeah, just like that. I said, we all have ways that we show our excitement. That's just how Bryce does it. And he's really excited to be up there with you guys. He thinks this is cool. You have a cool clubhouse. So the older boy kind of took the conversation. And I think then at that point they said, is he 7? No, they said, is he in kindergarten? That's what they said. And I said, he is, but he's 7. He's 7, but he's in kindergarten?
You mean lions?
Well, they said kindergarten because they said lions, because the lions are kindergartners. So that's how they see it.
Right.
So no, he used the word kindergarten.
Not meaning school grade, but whatever.
But they're naturally thinking that.
Okay.
Okay. So that's when I explained further, and I said he's 7, but we asked if he could be in the lions because of his autism, because we just wanted him to be able to kind of grow in this because it's all new to him. And he goes, and he's 7? I said, well, he just had a birthday in October. So when we started, he was only 6. He's in first grade. Oh, okay. So, they needed that little bit of an explanation. And then I just told him, Bryce is very smart, very friendly. He has a hard time with social. That's going to be, the hardest thing for Bryce is going to be able to make friends. So, that's why it's important that people can understand him and be nice to him, because this is where he's going to struggle. So I had the big explanation. Yeah. But in hindsight, I really second guessed myself the next day because I felt like maybe I failed him. That's where my feelings of failure, like, I don't know what to say. I really don't. I do not know what to say in those situations because I haven't been in them enough to have a good explanation that I think is going to register with the kids.
Mm-hmm. I know there was a second part to that whole treehouse thing. And why don't you explain that?
Okay. So it was kind of cold for South Florida that night. So the kids wanted to come back inside. So we all came back inside, and then they were playing in the other room and seemed to be fine. And I felt a little better about the situation because I had my big quote unquote explanation to them. And all in all, I felt like they got it, And so when they were in the other room, I felt like he would be safe and okay. But then they decided to go back outside, and they did leave him in the dust. Like, he wasn't invited or included to go back out. But then when he realized they were gone, he wanted to go back out. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay. And at this point, I think I was more involved in the meeting because I'd been there and there was conversations going on and there was voting going on and yada, yada. So he went outside without me. But again, I kind of felt like they got it. So it wasn't very long after that Bryce runs inside to us and says in his own way that they were trying to tell him to do something that would hurt him, that he would get a boo-boo. And we're like, what are you talking about? So then one of the boys ran in afterwards and said, he is smart. You're right. He knew that he was trying to get him to jump off there and he could have got really hurt. So then I'm like, what? You know? So I went outside and I said, tell me what happened and show me what happened. And I was remaining very calm, but inside I'm like, oh my goodness, you know? So I go over and then they showed me where he, I guess, was back up there. And one of the boys...
Who was hiding inside the cub. Yes, he was hiding. He apparently, because they went in and said, why did you do that? You know, and then he said, well, Bryce was doing anything that he told him to do. And so he was going to see if he would jump. You know, it was like, and I really know that the little boy wasn't trying to intentionally hurt Bryce. And there were some nails or something at the bottom.
There were nails. I mean, he could have seriously been injured. There were nails, like if he'd have scuffed down, because they showed me where it was. And I mean, he would have been really hurt. He would have been really hurt had he done that.
I'm glad you were out there and I wasn't.
Yeah. You know, and again, this little boy, I don't think he understood the gravity of what would have occurred, and he didn't. But he definitely understood that Bryce was an easy target and that he was trying to get him to do something.
Right.
You know,
right.
So that part he did get. The other part, no, he didn't really understand how he could have seriously injured himself.
Right.
I mean, he could have broken. I don't even want to go to what all could have happened. It was really high up. It was very dangerous.
Wow.
And Bryce kept saying, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. And ironically, when we were out there the first time, that same little boy was sitting on the edge. And Bryce kept saying, no, step back. That's dangerous. And I said, he's just looking out for you because he doesn't want you to get hurt. Ironically, right? Because that's our boy, like protecting.
Yeah.
And then
who he thought
turn
was
around.
his friend.
Yes. So that led to a whole other conversation that you and I have had to have, which is we've loosely used the term friend with Bryce because we want to encourage him to have friends, right? We're so desperate, like, oh, with autism, if he can have friends. So we'll say, oh, you're going to see your friends. You're going to see your friends,
right.
You know. But now we're having to explain to him good friends versus bad friends. Not everybody is your friend. And he even said, like, the next day, that night he seemed fine. Bryce seemed pretty oblivious to it. But let's remember, this is Bryce, and he processes information. And then it comes up either hours or days later. So the next evening, we were in the truck driving somewhere. And then he said, why would he try to hurt me? Why would my friend try to hurt me? Why would he do that? You know, and then we're like, wow, okay. We'll explain it to him. So we tried to use like some examples from Paw Patrol. Who are the good people? Who are the bad people? Is that a good friend or is that a bad friend? Not everybody is your friend, and some people might pretend to be your friend. But and we kept praising him. You did the right thing coming in and telling us that they were trying to get you to do something dangerous, and for telling them. You always tell them, and if mommy and daddy aren't there, you go to an adult and you tell them. You know, so we handled all of that, okay? I think where my guilt was coming in the next day was I was just my failure. And it is guilt. You feel bad. I feel like I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like I threw him into a den of wolves and, you know, subject to be attacked with no defenses for him, you know, because I just wasn't expecting that to happen. And I felt so bad that I trusted him to be able to go back out there with those kids. And then that happened. We
give other people the benefit of the doubt, you know, and they don't always meet expectations. I know. And I guess we can't expect them to meet expectations. You know, you shouldn't have expectations.
Yeah. And I guess like foolishly on my part, because these are Boy Scouts and they're taught so many things, values. I mean, and you're saying your values every week, and these kids have been in it for years, not a rookie like Bryce.
Right.
I think I did have higher expectations of how they would treat others. And so having said that, you know, when I was really thinking about this the next day, And I was like, what, talking to God about it. I really was. I was on my drive to work and I'm like, oh Lord, this is pretty rough week here. Chris was feeling like a failure. Then I'm feeling like a failure as a parent. And I told you this, I was listening to a podcast. I listened to Jesus Calling podcast, which has been fabulous. And I highly recommend it for anybody. And I like biographies and I like real testimonies. So these are people from all walks of life sharing their testimonies. And this happened to be, ironically, a Christian singer named Stephen Curtis Chapman that I just saw Wednesday night in concert, right? For his Christmas concert. That's the first time I've seen him. And he happened to be on that podcast. So I really know this is like God, just like delivering this message to me. And so as I was thinking that, and he was talking, and his daughter was on this podcast with him, and his daughter had just said like what a great father he was to them and how he used to write them letters before he went on tour and, all these kind of things. And he said literally just after I was going through these woes in my mind about failures, he said the word, it's really wonderful to hear you say that. Anytime that a child blesses their parent with words like that, it does make you feel good, but I have to tell you, there's so many times that I felt like I was a failure as your parent, and that I would be like, oh God, I really did that one wrong, and I don't know how to make that right. And he said, but it's God's grace that just comes in behind us. And then I hear you say things like that, and then I know that he covered it. And I did good not crying this time, because I'm going to tell you, I started crying in the car. And when I heard that, and I just said, thank you, God, thank you. I kept saying, thank you, because he gave me that. My grace is covering you. My grace is covering Chris. I chose you to be his parents. Now I am going to cry. I'm going to get you through this.
Yep.
And I will hold your hand through this. But I also realize that this isn't about Bryce. It's not all about Bryce. We are put into this situation and into this new group of people and into these parents and into these young boys that are going to grow up to be teenagers and are going to grow up to be men. They need to learn about this. We can't just expect them to know.
Right.
So it's our calling. He put us there for a reason.
Yeah.
And I am taking that message, as uncomfortable as it is, and believe me, it is very uncomfortable, but I know that God is stretching me, that I am to take these 9, what are they called? What are the things?
Oh, the Scout Law.
Thank you. I'm going to take the Scout Law. I'm going to write material about that, how each of those laws apply to understanding and being more accepting, not awareness, but acceptance of autism.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe that'll be our goal, is to have that word added to the Scout Law for all Scouts, acceptance.
Wow, babe.
Right?
I mean, that would be amazing.
Like, that is huge.
Yeah.
Because there's things like trustworthy, loyal, reverent, kind, courteous,
Yeah.
And
I think acceptance is what's missing.
Yeah.
And
you know what? That while you're talking about that, it brought something else to my mind, is that, if the parents are oblivious to what autism is, of course, their kids probably won't know either.
I mean, unless they know somebody. They encounter it in school. Right. That would be their best chance probably of encountering it. But I just feel like, that's why I'm there. And and I had told you, I was like, oh Lord, I don't want to give up another night, and I feel like I already have so much on my plate, but I felt like, nope, you're being called to do that, but why am I being called to do that? And then it was like, oh, now I know why. And then today in the message from church, just really, really like God's like pounding it home to me. But
interruptions.
Our pastor said, well, he's talking about interruptions, but what really jumped at me was he said, Mary was called to deliver Jesus, but she wasn't the only one called. We are also called to deliver Jesus to the world through our words, through our actions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's really powerful, because that was an amazing calling that Mary had to deliver Jesus physically, but we are all called to deliver him spiritually.
His message,
Yeah, that's the great commandment. Go and tell the world.
Yep.
So we are to deliver Jesus to everybody.
Through our words and actions. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's telling me, and you're going to deliver him through the scouts, and that's why I've got you there. And so that's what I'm going to be working on. I'm going to follow God's lead. I'm hoping to have that ready by April, because it's Autism Awareness Month. And then my plan is to go to each of the dens, like one by one, so it's smaller groups instead of a whole group, because I really want them to get it. And I'm really praying that God will give me the tools, which I know he will, but it's going to help me, because I do feel like sometimes I don't know how to explain it well enough.
Right.
You know, we've been on this journey for 5 years, but it's changing all the time. And who he was when he was 2 and 3 and 4, it was easier to explain, quite honestly. But now that he's 6 and 7 and he's taller and he looks older, and when you look at him from a distance, if he's not doing his flapping, you'd have no idea. But as soon as he engages with you and he starts talking and he gets so excited, it is different. And it's not a bad different. It's just different. And that's okay. But we have to teach everybody this acceptance that, you know, God created us as a variety, you know. It would be boring if we were all the same. And who's to say who's right and who's wrong? It's what society has set as what's deemed acceptable, you know. And so my heart really goes out to all of, you know, those who are on the autism spectrum in any way, shape, or form, and are created in a whole different way with their neurological wiring than, you know, you and I are. So it's not fair, really. It's not fair that we're considered, air quotes, normal, and they're not. I don't really want to even use that word, because who's to say what's normal and who's not? Who's to say what's acceptable and what's not? Now, there are some behaviors that are not acceptable. You know, you can't, but there's unacceptable behaviors from lots of people,
all walks
you know,
of
and that's why we have laws, and that's why we have rules. And, you know, our goal with Bryce is we're going to teach him to be nice and kind. And we had a dear friend that we visited this week, you know, and he has no idea what even went on this week.
Nope.
And he sat there at the table and he goes, wow, what a nice young man. If there were more people in this world that are just like Bryce, this world would be a better place.
Yeah.
And I thought, you have no idea what we've been through this week, but thank you. Yeah, thank you for recognizing that, you know, because we are trying to teach him all of those things, you know. So
it's a journey.
It is a journey. And so to kind of bring a lot of healing to this week, God works in such wonderful ways. First, he gave me that podcast nugget, which truly was wonderful. But Bryce does have a little best friend, and they met in VPK, which was our goal there, was that he would find a friend. And Michael is his name. And Michael gets Bryce, and he accepts Bryce, and he loves Bryce.
Same age, right?
Yeah. Bryce is just a couple months older than him. So we're watching that friendship develop. His mom is wonderful. I love her. She's a great friend. And she's so cool about understanding our heart's desire for Bryce, you know, to nurture that relationship with Michael. So this was the first time that we got to take him without his mom, which, you know, I know what it's like to send your child with somebody and trust somebody else. So I value and don't take for granted that she trusts us with her son. And so it was Michael's birthday this month. So we said, can we just take him and Bryce down to the go-kart place? Because we've been wanting to take Bryce down to go-karts. And we're like, well, how fun would it be if Bryce could take a friend?
Yeah.
So I mean, from the time they got in the back seat together, because it's the first time they've done something together like this.
Yeah.
Those two were putting the windows down and having so much fun. Like, they create their own fun together. And then we got them to the go-karts, and they got to race individually. And then you and I got to take them in the double seats and race each other. And they were just laughing.
Having the time.
Oh, my gosh. It was so healing.
Mm-hmm.
It was so healing. And then we took him to dinner afterwards, and they're sitting together. And it's good for Bryce because he has to learn to share his iPad,
Mm-hmm.
teach to take turns, and just to watch them get along and be able to navigate him with somebody that accepts him and loves him.
Yeah.
And Michael will, he sends messages through your phone for Bryce, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the number. But he will send message like, I love you, Bryce. It's like, it's really special.
Yeah.
And so that was like, again, you were like, isn't this like the most healing thing? I'm like, this is so healing because it's just showing us that, again, Bryce doesn't have to be friends with everybody in the world. And Bryce doesn't need a ton of best friends.
Right.
But I do want people in this world to be kind to him.
Yeah.
And they don't have to hang out with him, but be kind to him.
Yeah.
You
Just
know?
be kind.
Just be kind.
There's
My
so much hate
goodness.
in this world that kindness is, I don't know, it just needs to be more of it.
Well, and we did a podcast with Haley the last time, and she had mentioned, it's not always about Bryce. Sometimes people are just miserable and they're just not nice.
That's true. Yeah.
And I was glad to hear her say that. I'm like, sometimes as a parent, we need to hear that because that's true.
Right.
We could do everything right,
Yeah.
and yet our child could still get treated wrong.
Right.
And so
And
we
they
can't
don't-
beat ourselves
they
up
don't
about
understand.
that. Yeah. All we can do is know that we're doing everything within our power to help educate and to help create that awareness and acceptance.
And thankfully, Bryce does have several friends that know and understand
Absolutely,
him
he
that he
does.
has a lot of fun with. And we really cherished those relationships. And thanks to you for being proactive on that. Because when we
thanks.
got the ABA report and it was all social, he needs more social engagement. You said, this is what we're going to do. We're filling up his calendar with friends. And they're going to come over here during COVID, because we
Once
can't
it was
go.
safe, they did,
We
yep.
can't go to the playground, and we can't go here, we can't go there, so they can come over here. And he's just had a great time with all of them, and they become really good friends for him.
We do. We have a good handful of 6 to 8 kids that will come over here and play with him.
Yep.
And the parents are wonderful.
And they're all patient and
Yeah.
understanding, and
So it gives us hope.
there's hope.
And that's the message there. So not everybody's going to be like what we encountered earlier this week. And those kids need to learn.
Yeah.
And they may or may not change. I can't
Right.
control that.
No, you can't.
But it's also encouraging, and I have to remind myself, but you have all these others that you have brought Bryce around them, and they're totally good with it, So yeah, that's that was really the message that there's going to be failures, and there are, but God's grace is going to cover those failures, and we have to focus on. We need to focus on the things we're doing right,
And the things that we can do.
and the things that we can do. And when there is a fail or we feel like there's a fail, then we just have to talk it out, just like we did, and be easy on the other parent. Because can you imagine? I know I said something, but I didn't say it in a harsh,
Right.
yelling way at all. I was very sensitive. We have to address, and I even said, babe, we have to talk about it.
Yeah.
But in a gentle way, and that's what we have to remember as couples, because that's why marriages suffer in this world,
You have to be
in
able-
this world of autism. If you can't communicate without getting upset at the other or
Right.
blaming, and you don't want to
Right.
blame blame is like the biggest thing you want to avoid.
Sometimes, when I met you, I learned about your 24-hour rule.
I do
Or,
have one.
you sleep on it or whatever. And that's one of the great things that you brought to our relationship, because, just not between the two of us, because we don't really argue very much at all, because we do communicate a lot, so we're on top of things before it gets into something worse.
And if
we
we
talk
do-
things out.
Yeah.
But that that little rule that you have, even after that night at Cub Scouts, you took that 24 hours just to reflect on it before you talked about it, or we did talk about it before then, but
Only you and I talked about
Right.
it, though. I didn't talk to anybody else about that.
Right.
Because that was not the right thing to do.
Exactly.
I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell any of my friends. And believe me, I was hurting. But it felt like, and you even said, oh, you're telling, because we went to dinner with friends and you're like, are you telling her about that? I'm like, oh, no, I don't even want to talk about that. I really don't, because it was like still very fresh. And what good would it do?
Right.
I just didn't. I wanted to share it for the podcast. And I'm really glad that we waited a few days. And I think, again, listen, we were going to do it earlier, but God delayed it because
he wanted to bless us with the great time we had at go-karts.
Yes.
And,
Yeah. And even what he gave me today, with that affirmation about, delivering this message. So, I really hope and pray that this helps somebody, as we go into this new year, because this may or may not be the last podcast of the new year, but
the old year.
The old year.
The year we want to forget.
Yeah, this may or may not be the last podcast of 2020. It may be. But as we enter into this new year, I really want this podcast I wanted to bring value to people. When I listen to podcasts, I hope to take away at least one nugget from it. And if I find I'm not getting anything out of it, I move on, and we go through seasons of life. But if people are tuning in here, I'm just always praying that somebody will get one thing at least out of this 40 to 45 minutes that we talk.
If nothing else, they're getting our prayers.
And that's very true, babe. We do.
We pray for our audience.
We do, because we know this journey is not easy at all. At all. It's not easy on the marriage. It's not easy on the individual parents.
Right.
You battle sadness, you battle depression. And if that's if you're prone to those kind of emotions, boy, I could see how you could go down a rabbit hole. I'm this optimist, and yet I've cried twice this week.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's a lot of different angles things can attack.
It is, and sometimes I don't want to admit that it's hard, but in reality it is. So my mom is going through such a difficult time right now with my dad. And in fact, we were sharing previously that his lung thing came back benign, but gosh, he had another episode of a couple of mini strokes, and it just set him back again. And I said to Mom, so how are you doing? And she's like, you know how it is. We just pick it up and we just keep going. And it's true. And I admire her for that. But I also know that she had a good cry with my brother. And I'm glad she did, because you got to get that out. I try to stay strong for her because I tried to bring the laughter and the fun, and I was able to do that last weekend. But she's going through such a hard time, but she knows, and, I rarely will say that it's hard. But if I do get vulnerable with somebody, it's with my mom. And every now and then I'll be like, Mom, this really is hard.
Yeah.
And it is, but we're so blessed with Bryce. He's such an awesome kid.
Yeah.
We say it all throughout the day, don't we? I mean, all day today, we're like, wow, he's just great. And he's been like so full of, I love you today, and we don't get that all the time at all, not verbally.
I was outside doing something, I was somewhere else working, and I came into the room, and Bryce came out of the bedroom. He's like, I love you. I'm like, wow. I said, thanks.
And give you a big hug.
Gave me a big hug. I'm like, wow, that is awesome.
And then he was sharing something else with you. And then you were painting our closet, and he's like, you're doing a great job, Daddy, painting that closet.
Putting the wood in.
Thank you. You're doing a great job. I mean, that's the kind of kid he is, because he hears us. I mean, kids do mirror behaviors, and we are constantly building him up and telling him what a great job he's doing. But what's great is he's recognizing other people that are doing great things, and he's verbally giving them praise. How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
So, that's what we're going to keep doing, is working on what we can control, because there's so many things we cannot control. And, that's one of my mantras, control what you can control. And what we can do is continue to teach Bryce to be a good human being.
That's it.
And to be loving, and to be polite, and to be kind. And when he strays from that, because we all have a sin nature, so it's a lot easier for us to do the wrong things than to do the right things. That's why you have to teach a kid to do right. You don't have to teach them to do wrong. They figure that out, So we're just going to keep continuing to help him, and that's
Explain
what we're called to do.
So,
well, it's been quite a year and quite a year on this podcast. I'm glad we were able to continue to do it. We've been able to share our world. We've heard from a lot of listeners. It's been wonderful. I even got a Christmas card in the mail. Thank you, Danica. That was very sweet.
Yes,
thank you. Just building those relationships. I was in touch with my African mama that, I love so much. And it's just... I love being able to have those connections because I don't have very many here. But for those of you who do pray, I do want to lift up prayer for our autism mommy that is here locally, and her name is Stephanie. She's been diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
She is probably in her, I don't know her age, but I'm going to say that she's probably in her early 30s. Her son is going to be 9 next month.
On the spectrum.
And he is on the spectrum, and he is, he's learning to talk, but he's not very verbal. So she doesn't get a lot out of him. She doesn't always know what he's thinking because he hasn't reached that place yet to where he can always express it. But believe me, he has to be knowing that something's going on. And she had the cancer. They did the surgery and we thought everything was fine, and it came back and it's in her lymph nodes now, and she's starting chemo and radiation tomorrow.
And she's a single mom.
She is a single mom. She is an amazing person with one of the kindest souls that I've even met.
She's so laid back.
Oh my gosh. And she's so sweet. And she even is an RBT. I mean, she took that route because she has such a heart for all the children that are on the spectrum. So if you think about it and if you have a prayer list, please add Stephanie to that as we help her through this cancer journey, because that's what we're there for, is to help other people, help our neighbors. Amen to that. So happy New Year to everyone, and we'll be back again in 2021.
Adios, muchachos.
Bye.
Bye.